Imagine you're sitting in a room where the monitors are, like, the only source of light. You got half a dozen dashboards open, a really lukewarm cup of coffee, and just a literal endless stream of red alerts flashing across your screen.
Oh, yeah, and probably a headache that just won't quit.
Exactly. I mean, you are a security operations center analyst, or maybe a security reliability engineer. You are the digital border patrol for, a Fortune 500 company or a national power grid.
Or a massive hospital network. The stakes are just insanely high.
Right. And for you, every single alert popping up on that screen could just be a harmless false alarm, or, and here's the terrifying part, it could be the tip of the spear of a ransomware attack that costs your organization $50 million.
Right.
No pressure, right?
Right. It's an incredibly high-stakes environment. And the reality we are facing right now is that the cybersecurity industry is in the middle of this completely catastrophic human capital crisis.
Yeah, and see, when people hear human capital crisis in tech, the immediate assumption is usually, well, it's a pipeline issue.
Oh, for sure. They think we don't have enough talent.
Exactly. People think we just don't have enough kids graduating with computer science degrees to fill the open roles. But looking through the sources for this deep dive, that is not the actual story at all.
No, it's really not.
It isn't just a recruiting problem. The crisis is the rapid, brutal burnout of the people who are already sitting in those dark rooms on the front lines. I mean, our defenders are quietly collapsing under the pressure.
And that silent collapse is the core focus of the materials we are diving into today. So we have a pair of really fascinating academic documents, an academic research canvas, and a formal research question proposal.
Yeah, and they're digging into some deep stuff.
They really are. They are entirely focused on what the authors call the cognitive cost of cybersecurity knowledge management.
I love that phrase because it points to something totally invisible. Like, we aren't looking at firewall configurations today. We aren't looking at encryption keys.
No, we're looking at the human brain.
Right. Our mission here is to dig into the actual psychological mechanics of how cyber analysts process information, why their current workflow is completely frying their nervous systems, and, how a very specific structured model could potentially save them.
The stakes here are fascinating because, honestly, the cybersecurity industry generally has a massive blind spot.
A blind spot for the humans.
Exactly. The entire sector obsessively focuses on technological solutions. If there's a threat, the reaction is always, well, let's buy a better firewall, or let's develop faster threat detection algorithms.
Or get a new cloud security manager.
Right. But the human element remains the primary point of failure. I mean, you can have the most sophisticated, expensive software on the planet, but if the human being sitting in the chair interpreting that data is too mentally exhausted to care, the entire defense system completely falls apart.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because lots of professions work long hours under high stress. You've got ER doctors, air traffic controllers, trial lawyers.
Well, absolutely.
So what is it about this specific job, staring at network logs, that burns the human brain out so thoroughly? The source documents point us toward an underlying theory from a researcher named Ormerod from a 2021 study involving something called the social epistemological theory of intelligence.
Yeah, I know. It sounds like a ridiculously dense philosophy seminar.
It really does.
But, I mean, social epistemology in this context is really just the study of how a group of people create, share, and process knowledge. Ormerod's research highlights the massive epistemic complexity of cyber defense.
Epistemic complexity.
Right. So when an analyst is looking at a dashboard, they are constantly bombarded with what we call tacit threat intelligence.
Tacit meaning like unspoken, implied, or instinctual.
Yes, exactly.
It's the classic grandmother cooking from a secret recipe analogy. She just knows what a pinch of salt looks like or when the dough feels right.
Yeah.
But she can't easily tell you the exact measurements in grams.
That is a great baseline. So now, apply that grandmother's instinct to a network defender. An experienced SOC analyst might see a sequence of IP addresses pinging a server. And it might not trigger a massive red alarm in the security software, but the analyst looks at the cadence of those pings, the time of day, the specific ports being probed.
And their gut just tells them something is wrong.
Exactly. Their gut says, this is wrong. This is a reconnaissance scan from a threat actor. That gut feeling, that is tacit knowledge.
But they can't just operate on a gut feeling. Like, they can't walk over to the chief information security officer and say, hey, I blocked this entire subnet because I have a weird vibe.
Oh, they absolutely cannot. I mean, they would be fired. They have to rapidly synthesize that tacit instinct into explicit organizational knowledge.
So they have to translate it.
Right. They have to turn the vibe into a concrete alert, a written incident report, or a definitive defensive action that the rest of the security team can understand and verify.
And act on during the next shift.
Exactly.
No, it's like forcing the grandmother to write down the exact scientific measurements of her instinctual recipe for a busy, high-volume restaurant kitchen.
Yes, perfect.
And the kitchen is actively on fire while she's trying to translate it.
Yeah.
What happens when the organization doesn't have a system to help her translate that?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where we hit the core mechanism of the burnout. The research calls this breakdown epistemic friction.
Epistemic friction.
Right. When there is no formalized, smooth process to transition knowledge from the tacit to the explicit, the friction of trying to make that translation places a severe psychological burden directly on the shoulders of the individual analyst.
Wow. So the company isn't helping?
No, the organization isn't bearing the weight of processing that information. The individual's brain is bearing all of it.
You can almost feel the physical weight of that. You're sitting there, you know something is wrong, but the system you work in doesn't give you a language or a pathway to communicate it without exhausting yourself.
It's totally draining.
To understand the real-world toll of that friction, the sources bring in a 2024 paper from Reeves, Pattinson, and Budovicius. And I have to say, the title of their paper is incredibly evocative. It's called The Sleepless Sentinel.
It paints a very bleak, very accurate picture of the industry, honestly. The sleepless sentinel. Their findings show that this unmanaged epistemic friction isn't just making people tired.
It's deeper than that.
Way deeper. It directly causes overwhelming emotional exhaustion and a psychological phenomenon called depersonalization.
Depersonalization.
Yeah.
That's when you start to detach from reality, right? Like you were watching yourself go through the motions from the outside.
Yeah, pretty much. In a professional context, it manifests as this extreme cynicism and detachment from the work and from colleagues. It is basically a defense mechanism.
To protect the brain.
Exactly. If you are constantly overwhelmed by the friction of trying to process threats without support, your brain protects itself by simply stopping to care. The alerts just become background noise.
Which is terrifying for a security team.
Right. And ultimately, this results in reduced professional efficacy. They literally become worse at stopping cyber threats because their cognitive load is totally maxed out. They hit a wall.
I have to push back on the tech industry's narrative here, though.
Go for it.
Because I see the marketing all the time from these massive cybersecurity vendors. You know, machine learning threat detection, automated response protocols, AI-driven analytics. Organizations are spending millions on this stuff.
Billions, probably.
Right. So why isn't the technology fixing this cognitive load problem? If AI is analyzing the logs, shouldn't the human be doing less?
It seems counterintuitive, I know, but the sources explicitly address why technology isn't the savior here. I mean, the industry builds better mousetraps, absolutely, but adding an AI engine doesn't manage the human cognitive load. In many cases, it actually makes it worse.
Wait, really? How does doing the work for them make it worse?
Because the AI isn't removing the epistemic friction, it's just generating more explicit data that the human then has to tacitly interpret.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you install a new machine learning tool, and now instead of one dashboard, the analyst has 4. Instead of 10 alerts an hour, the AI flags 100 potential anomalies an hour.
So it's just a fire hose of information.
Exactly. The technology solves a digital volume problem, but it completely ignores the human translation problem. It ignores how knowledge is actually managed inside the human brain.
So more software just means more noise, and more noise means a faster path to depersonalization for the sleepless sentinel.
Yep, the system is fundamentally broken.
So how do we fix it? How do we build a bridge over that epistemic friction so the analyst doesn't have to carry the weight alone?
The proposed solution relies on a structured framework outlined by Serchian and colleagues in 2024. It focuses on something called the SECI model. SECI.
SECI, what does that stand for?
It stands for Socialization, Externalization, Combination, and Internalization. It is a really systematic knowledge management process.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because abstract academic frameworks are great, but I want to know what this actually looks like. Walk me through the SEI model.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's say it's 2 p.m. on a random Tuesday, and our SOC analyst is staring down a brand new, highly sophisticated ransomware attack. How does this model change their reality?
Okay, let's trace that attack through the 4 stages. The first stage is socialization. This is tacit-to-tacit knowledge transfer.
Gut feeling to gut feeling.
Right. In a typical messy SOC, a junior analyst might freeze up seeing a weird payload they don't recognize. But in a SECI environment, you have structured, intentional mentorship.
They aren't alone.
Exactly. The junior analyst is sitting right next to a veteran. The veteran instinctively navigates the anomaly, quarantines the right server, and stops the bleeding.
Okay.
The junior analyst absorbs that gut feeling through shared experience without anyone having to write a manual yet.
They learn the rhythm of the response by just being in the room, learning by osmosis.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, the attack is stopped. What is the second stage?
Externalization. This is translating tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge, and honestly, it is usually the hardest part.
The burning kitchen part.
Right. In our ransomware scenario, this looks like a mandatory, formal post-incident debrief. The team sits down, and the veteran is asked to articulate exactly why they quarantined that specific server when the payload looked normal.
So they have to explain the vibe.
Yes. They externalize their instinct into a tangible artifact, a written report or a logged ticket.
So they aren't just left alone to figure out how to explain it. The organization actually provides a dedicated time and structure to help them write down the recipe.
Exactly, which leads directly to the third stage, combination. This is explicit to explicit transfer.
Combining the reports.
Yeah. The organization takes that individual incident report and combines it with other explicit data, maybe vendor threat intelligence or logs from a previous attack 6 months ago.
Okay, that makes sense.
They synthesize all of this into a documented, continuously updated threat playbook. They are basically building a massive, searchable library of organizational knowledge.
So the veteran's gut instinct from Tuesday afternoon is now a formal checklist that lives on the company's server forever.
Yes. And that is what enables the final stage. Internalization. Explicit knowledge transitioning back into tacit knowledge.
Wait, how does it go back to being tacit?
Think about it. 3 months later, a brand new analyst is working the night shift. They see a similar weird payload, but instead of panicking, they pull up that updated playbook. They follow the explicit steps, and by practicing those steps over and over, the playbook becomes muscle memory. It becomes their own new gut instinct. The cycle is complete.
Wow. The psychological relief there has to be massive. The SECI model basically acts like oil in the gears.
That's a great way to put it.
It actively mitigates the friction. If I'm that new analyst on the night shift, I don't have to rely on my own exhausted brain to invent a solution from scratch. The organization has already processed the knowledge for me. The system holds the weight.
And that structured pipeline is theoretically what saves the defender's mental health. It manages the cognitive cost.
Now, I say theoretically, because it's one thing to build an elegant framework on a whiteboard. It's another thing entirely to prove it works in the real world.
Very true.
And the second document we're looking at is actually a formal proposal to empirically test this relationship. They want to prove that SEI stops burnout. But how do you actually measure something as invisible as cognitive load? You can't just send out a survey asking, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how tired are you?
Yeah, you're right. Simple surveys are completely useless for this. The researchers rely on highly specific, standardized psychological tools to measure 2 distinct variables.
Okay.
So to see if the SECI practices the independent variable actually reduce the mental burden, they have to measure the unmeasurable. First, they tackle cognitive load using a modified version of the NASA Task Load Index, known as the NASA TLX.
Wait, the NASA TLX, I'm assuming from the name that this wasn't originally designed for IT workers.
No, it wasn't. It was developed in the 1980s to assess the intense mental workload of pilots, astronauts, and air traffic controllers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it doesn't just measure physical fatigue. It measures mental demand, physical demand, temporal demand, which is basically time pressure, and then effort and frustration.
You know, to really grasp the difference between physical load and cognitive load, I always think about driving in heavy rain.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. If I am driving down the highway at night in just a torrential downpour, my physical load is 0. I'm just sitting in a padded chair, occasionally twitching my foot or my wrists.
Right, you're not lifting weights.
Exactly. But my cognitive load is completely maxed out. My brain is calculating traction, the reflection of taillights on the water, the distance of the semi-truck next to me, the hydroplaning risk.
Yes.
When I finally get out of the car an hour later, I'm physically exhausted, even though I didn't run a marathon. My brain burned all the energy.
That is a perfect metaphor for the SOC analyst experience. I mean, they are sitting in comfortable chairs in nice climate-controlled rooms. But the temporal demand, the ticking clock of a ransomware attack, and the sheer mental effort of processing thousands of alerts creates that exact same torrential downpour effect in their minds.
And the NASA TLX captures that hidden exhaustion.
It does. It captures all of it.
Okay, so they use the NASA tool for the cognitive load. How do they measure the emotional side, the depersonalization we talked about?
For that, the researchers use the Maslach Burnout Inventory, or the MBI. It's basically the gold standard for specifically quantifying emotional exhaustion and the feeling of reduced personal accomplishment.
So they use both.
Right. So the research mechanics are quite straightforward. They look at cybersecurity teams that highly utilize structured SECI practices, like those formal debriefs and playbooks, and they compare their NASA TLX and MBI scores against teams that just kind of wing it.
I love the elegance of that study. But we have to talk about the massive logistical nightmare of actually pulling this off.
Oh, it is a nightmare.
Think about who you are studying. You are dealing with highly secure, deeply paranoid corporate IT teams.
By definition.
Their entire professional existence is dedicated to keeping outsiders out of their systems. And an academic researcher is going to knock on their door and say, "Hi, I'd like to analyze your internal workflows, review your incident response practices, and deeply probe the psychological vulnerabilities of your most critical security personnel."
Yeah, that's a tough sell.
Good luck getting past corporate legal. I mean, I cannot imagine a Fortune 500 company allowing someone to gather data on how stressed and error-prone their defense team is.
This raises an important question, and it is a massive hurdle. It requires a very specific approach. The source text explicitly outlines the mandatory ethical and logistical considerations required to even attempt this.
What do they do?
Well, the researcher can't just hand out a Google form. They describe the research cycle as a scaffolded process.
A scaffolded process.
Right. It's a carefully negotiated, multi-layered protocol designed specifically to build trust with these paranoid organizations.
But how do they navigate the actual security risks of looking at how an organization handles threat intelligence?
By heavily separating the process from the content. The study mandates strict data anonymization and secure informed consent, obviously. But more importantly, it requires the rigorous sanitization of all proprietary engineering data and internal threat metrics.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the researchers do not want to know the IP addresses of the attackers or the specific vulnerabilities being patched or the network architecture of the company.
Oh, okay. So they have to design the data collection so that absolutely zero corporate secrets are exposed. It's a delicate dance.
Very delicate.
You're trying to measure the crushing stress of the job without actually looking at the highly classified technical details causing the stress.
Which is exactly why relying on established subjective tools like the NASA TLX and the MBI is so critical. The researcher can measure the subjective human experience of the workload, the frustration, the time pressure, the emotional exhaustion, without ever needing to know the technical specifics of the zero-day exploit the analyst was fighting.
Well, that makes total sense.
Yeah, the focus stays entirely on the intersection of the organizational knowledge structure and the human psychology.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed all the way from the dark, flashing screens of the Security Operations Center through the dense theories of social epistemology,
Which we survived.
barely down into the practical reality of the SECI ransomware response, and finally into the mechanics of measuring astronaut-level stress in IT workers.
The core takeaway across all these sources is a massive paradigm shift. Burnout in cybersecurity isn't just about long hours, and it certainly isn't a problem we can solve just by buying more AI software.
It's deeper.
It is a profound failure of knowledge management. When an organization fails to provide a system to translate an analyst's tacit instincts into explicit, usable playbooks, they crush that individual under the weight of epistemic friction.
But there's a fix.
Yes. By utilizing structured models like SECI to socialize, externalize, and internalize that knowledge, organizations can actively relieve that pressure. Protecting our digital borders isn't just about protecting servers and writing better code. It requires actively protecting the human minds that are guiding them.
And that brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. This research highlights just how incredibly difficult it is to bridge abstract philosophical concepts with the rigid technical realities of IT architecture.
It's a huge gap.
It really is. We are so conditioned to think of cybersecurity as a math problem or a coding problem. But what if the ultimate key to future cybersecurity isn't hiring better coders? What if the key is hiring better philosophers to understand how our defenders actually think and process reality?
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
Right. Think about your own workplace, whether you are in tech, healthcare, education, or retail. Where is the tacit knowledge trapped in someone's head right now?
It's everywhere.
Who is the veteran in your office, desperately trying to translate their instinctual recipe, while the daily operations literally burn down around them? Because wherever that knowledge is trapped, you can guarantee there is unseen epistemic friction.
Absolutely.
And somewhere in your organization, there's a sleepless sentinel burning out, just waiting for a playbook that hasn't been written yet.